So thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Um, Now this is a topic that I've been wanting to do for a couple of weeks now, but it always got bumped for something else. Now I did talk about international rail, I think sometime last year maybe. But this is going to be something a little more specialized than that, which is like it's a specific set of cross border rail issues, and I'm going to specialize to Europe because the other place in the world, the other places in the world with very strong passenger rail networks are, I guess, East Asia and India. And in East Asia, what would be cross-border rail? North Korea, like Japan is an island, Taiwan is an island, South Korea, yeah, has a land border with North Korea. Yeah, we can talk about cross-border rail between Seoul and Pyongyang, right? And in India, sure, we can talk about a pan-South Asian rail network, but lol. So this is an issue that I think is most visible in Europe. Now, I will say there might be some analogs for US to Canada stuff. Singapore, Malaysia, sure. I don't actually know. I don't know if the original plan in the 50s did. It's possible. Maybe the pre-war plan, because at the time, not only was South Korea a Japanese colony, but also Japan. Yeah. It's a. I think it was a colonial era plan, right? Because Japan not only governed South Korea as a colony, but specifically had a program of forced assimilation. So the belief was that in time, Korea would be just like Japan. Singapore, Malaysia. I know they're having plans about this. I will say that the reason these plans are falling, I don't want to say falling apart because, but that the plans are not very solid is, it's a genuine problem with cross-border rail. And this is actually a thing that we have in Europe. So, and this is like a crayon map that I'm working on, and I'm just showing it. I'm not going to talk very much about the details of this map. It's perhaps better to look at the real map, and I think it's called High-Speed Rail in Europe. Now, I will say, I'm talking about cross-border rail. My interest tends to be intercity, but it is not the only one. For example, the British-German advocate, Jon Worth, I think he's mostly interested in regional rail, so he's been doing this series of trips with attached events to them about cross-border rail, and I'm going to talk about some regional examples where often in general the regional rail is worse than the intercity rail, and as I said, I'm going to talk about this in due time in this video, but I want to just start by showing you the high-speed rail map of Europe, and I know I've done this in previous videos. Where's my head? Okay, my head is on the right. Good. So you want to look at lines that are called red or purple, maybe yellow if you really want. But the thing to note is that they don't actually cross borders very much. So we have a blueprint for rail revival in Europe, as opposed to, let's say, or blueprint for not even getting into much decline like in Japan, and that blueprint is called high-speed rail, to the point that, again, there are going to be some exceptions I'm going to talk about in a sec, but for the most part the modern network is the red and maybe orange stuff. So in Italy there's this beautiful line. The main Italian cities are mostly collinear. You have Torino, Milano, Bologna, Firenze, Roma, and then Napoli, all connected with pretty fast lines, and then they keep expanding to the biggest collection of cities that are not on this line, which are east of Milan, north of Bologna. So things like Brescia, Verona, Venezia, but that's it. Now, if you know anything about the terrain of Italy, yeah, of course, there's nothing across the Alps. It's the Alps. And in fact, they're building a line across the Alps, but slowly. But now let's look at the biggest high-speed rail network, the highest ridership high-speed rail network in Europe, which is still France. Germany has more intercity rail ridership than France at this point. I think per capita they're about equal. But in Germany, as I said, in Germany it's a medium speed thing, and you can kind of say there's way more yellow and less red compared with France. In France, look, the line goes up until Marseille, and right now they're slowly building it from Marseille to Nice. The problem is that the terrain is not great. There's a branch to Montpellier. And yeah, between France and Spain there are mountains, but actually the mountains are here. So Spain actually drilled a tunnel across the mountains, and now they're just waiting for France to connect. Here Bordeaux, and maybe they will eventually connect to Irun. Going east, they go up to Strasbourg, but no actual connection to Germany. I mean, the trains go onward to Germany, but at much lower speed. And same from this connection. The trains from here into Germany are really slow. The only place in Europe where we see actually fast cross-border rail between major cities is Paris to Brussels. There's also London, but there's security theater at Eurostar, which is going to matter. The problem is, so this is Paris, Bruxelles, and the problem is, even these lines are really compromised. Why are they compromised? I said that Italy's lines are fast, but the average speed is 160. It depends on which line you're talking about. So the problem is, and this is, you can see it a little on the map, Roma to Firenze was literally the first high-speed line built in Europe. It actually predates Paris to Lyon by a couple of years. I think this opened 77, the Direttissima. It wasn't expanded until much later. So essentially, this opens, gets some ridership, this opens, becomes a smashing success, and then much later, Italy builds the rest under French influence. So this is kind of slow. Importantly, most of the important stations are terminals, Roma, Firenze, Milano. This means that the routes into these are pretty slow. And if you want a train from, let's say, Milano to Napoli, you would so you might expect it to be a little bit faster because it bypasses Rome, but actually the bypass is going to be slow. So a lot of it is just, the structure is not very good for this, and in Firenze they are actually building a through station at great expense. And I think the average speed on the lines that are entirely 300 is more like 180, 190, which is on the low side, but it's not. I mean, I don't want to slag. I live in Germany. I mean, I think our fastest connection between two major cities is Frankfurt to Köln. This is a 300 kilometer an hour line, but because of certain compromises, I mean, I shouldn't maybe say the road is compromised. The road is not actually compromised. Compromise is mostly in operations. They should have been an hour and more than that. So I think the average speed here is maybe 170. And I think this is the fastest connection between two major German cities. Like Hauptbahnhof to Hauptbahnhof, not like Deutz to Flughafen or something. So anyway, the high-speed networks barely cross borders. The exception is Paris to Bruxelles, and both to London. Now, as I said, there's an exception of how to modernize your intercity rail system without doing as much high-speed rail. Now, you should do high-speed rail if you don't do that, if you're in a big country like Germany. But Germany, remember, Germany has more intercity rail ridership than France. They're about the same per capita. Germany has much shorter average trip length, which, if you're wondering if it's about geography, no, it's not. It's about the fact that in Germany, the frequency is very solid. Actually, I want to say I have a video about this, but it's a video that's not on YouTube because the recording cut out in the middle. But instead I wrote it up as a very long blog post. The issue is that certain operating peculiarities of France deter short distance ridership, like the frequency sucks. Other peculiarities of Germany, like the average speed is not very good, deter longer distance ridership. So same ridership per capita, but the average trip in France, I want to say, is 50% longer, maybe even twice as long. But even the German medium speed rail network, the parts of it that work, it's all about timed connections, coordination. Even better in Switzerland, the connections are impeccably timed, and everything, the planning is impeccably coordinated. So they build medium speed bypasses based on how to make connections work better, essentially. And that's only within the country. You cross the border and everything sucks, more or less. Maybe there's going to be one connection that's going to work. In the case of Germany, Switzerland, it's to Basel, so it's not even to the main city, which would be Zurich. Just the connections from Zurich to Germany are abominable. Zurich to München is getting some investment, but it's pretty bad. Connections between, let's say, Munich and Vienna, not the best, even though internally the Austrian rail network is very good, and the German one, not as good, but it is also pretty good. High-speed rail suffers from the same kind of issue of lack of coordination. It's maybe not easy to see on the map here. Maybe I need to show you the map specific to Belgium, but Belgium has a problem where where's Belgium here? Here. So here's Belgium. So between Brussels and Paris, you have an entirely high-speed network, but Brussels to the Netherlands has a low-speed gap from Brussels to Antwerp. And likewise, going east, there are these low-speed gaps through Leuven, through Liège, to the point that the average speed, even to Aachen, which is right at the border, I think this average speed is maybe 140. So high-speed rail in Europe, no, Italy does not have exclusive right-of-way into and out of the. Exactly, it's Italy. It's the overpriced tickets. This is the only, unfortunately, fast within Europe, within EU line or within Schengen line, Paris to Brussels, and it's overpriced. And this is a problem because I keep talking about my formula for figuring out ridership. I have a video about this, in which I was testing alternatives, and basically it's always pick your poison, but the formula is that I use in various spreadsheets. For example, on trying to figure out things in the United States, is population times population to the 0.8 power, and and then you divide by this is an older post. There's the newest post about this, and the reason I keep posting pics of barbarian of D&D barbarian is that the models are just not very powerful, and I don't want to people thinking that they're sophisticated. They are not. Yeah, it's here. So this is the model. There should be squiggly brackets here. This is a constant. Just population to the 0.8th power times population to the 0.8th power times distance squared, and if distance is below 500, it's set to be 500. This is like the fact that I'm ignoring distance up to 500. This is really weird in the model. Kind of what you would expect is distance plus a constant for access and egress times, but for some reason on Shinkansen data, this looks better. The reason for the 0.8 is that you want the model to give you the right numbers when you split up your metro area, and Now, if you split up the metro area, you want it to be purely additive, so you want not to have any exponent. But in practice, there are diseconomies of scale, and I mean, the access time is longer in a larger metro area. And in practice, if you're splitting up the metro area, you're probably going to split it to pieces, not all of which are at the train station. So, for example, if I take the metro area of... So Rhine-Ruhr is a terrible example because all of the pieces have train stations, and they should get a bonus for that, which they do in the model. But Berlin, for example, if you try to split up Berlin into, I don't know, city and various suburban regions, then then in theory, the 0.8 exponent means that if you split up, then you get higher ridership, right? Berlin and Brandenburg together are 6 million people. If you pretend that they're different, it's 3.5 to the 0.8, and then plus 2.5 to the 0.8. It is quantity 4.8, and if you do 6 to the 0.8, it's 4.2. So it does give you a bonus to split, but what this really does is it countermands the fact that if I were to split Berlin and Brandenburg, then Brandenburg would have longer access times to most destinations, because Brandenburg doesn't generally get intercity rail stops, right? I mean, if you go between Berlin and München, the stops go Hauptbahnhof and then Südkreuz, and then the next stop is going to be Leipzig or Halle. So from Brandenburg, you have to backtrack on various regional trains, and maybe you're on the one slice of Brandenburg that's on the line. Maybe there's one intermediate stop to get these suburbs. Well, that's one slice, and the others have to get to Berlin. So you want to countermand, and this in practice looks like the right way to do it. And again, I'm training it on Shinkansen data. It's imperfect. I have a video on that. Yeah, I didn't. Right. I didn't post my latest model because this is my original model. The stream was about comparing the model with two alternatives and finding that both alternatives in certain ways fall short. Now, I bring up the model because I can actually try to see whether the model predicts European rail ridership accurately. Now, unfortunately, I don't have sufficient data within France to tell you that. I don't have city pair data in France. I can't tell how many people ride between Paris and Lyon. I can maybe try to do all city pairs in France and see what the model says about that, but that's really hairy. It's especially hairy in France because France is a country full of little cities. The median French person, just as a reminder, lives in a metro area of 350,000 people. The median Japanese person lives either in Nagoya metro population about 9 million or Fukuoka metro population 5.5 million. So in an East Asian context, it's much easier to identify what the metro areas are, and in Europe it's harder unless you have the ridership on a specific corridor or ideally specific city pair. And I will say that I know what the Berlin to Hamburg ridership is. It's 6 million a year, and if I apply the model to everything that would use Berlin to Hamburg, so things like Hamburg to Leipzig, maybe even Hamburg to Dresden, Berlin to Kiel, things like that, I think the model predicts 5 million. So so domestic ridership maybe slightly overperforms the model. And I bring all this up because Eurostar serves a small a small closed number of cities because Britain insists on security theater. I won't say it predates Brexit, but I mean, yeah, it predates Brexit from the 90s, but maybe this sort of attitude that that the UK does not need to join Schengen, that the UK can randomly impose security theater on trains through the channel is maybe the same, we're not exactly Europe attitude that led to the sort of politics that led to Brexit. But the point is, Eurostar severely underperforms the model. We actually have, again, we have the ridership for Eurostar. It's about, I think, 10 or 11 million people a year. And I can tell you what the model would predict because, again, it's just London to Paris, Brussels, and Lille. I think that there might at this point be trains to Amsterdam, but I don't think there were when when I was starting to look at the ridership, at ridership modeling, and maybe there's some occasional summer only trains, maybe once a day or something, to one specific ski resort in the French Alps. But for the most part, just London to these three cities, so we can actually add this up. As I said, the ridership is about 10 million, maybe 11 million. The model, I want to say, predicts 25. Now, the good news is that I can actually tell you why it underperforms, and yeah, people are already saying this in comments. It's overpriced tickets. It's also, as I said, the security theater. The security theater adds at least half an hour. You're told to come to your Eurostar trip half an hour before. You are, in practice, advised you're going to wait more than half an hour at peak times. So when the ridership is highest, because their system is not as high capacity as as a normal domestic system of people just walk onto the train and get a ticket. The problem is that so I'm supposed to budget a minimum of an extra half hour, but if it's but if it's peak time, then I should also expect the train to be delayed, which did happen when I took the train in the summer. And so in practice, if you try to do it relative to the correct trip time and relative to the fact that the extra half hour or 45 minutes is not going to be sitting on a moving train, it's going to be waiting, it's going to be queuing for passport checks, queuing for security, queuing again for access to the platform, and then maybe in the middle you're confined to a lounge where there's just not going to be enough place to sit. You apply a malus to that, and you take into account the fact that the Eurostar ticket fares are per passenger kilometer about twice as high as on domestic TGVs. This is also true on Thalys. Thalys is very expensive. Same thing. Yeah, of course, people are not going to ride as much. No shit. So, like, at policy level, it's just most of it is stuff like make sure that the trains like Thalys are not overpriced. The problem is it's not something you can do with competition because you can't compete with SNCF. At some level, you can't compete with the government. You can only make the government better. And so, again, so that's the intercity situation. The issue is coordination. High-speed rail does not exist unless the state wants it to exist. You do not have high-speed rail done by the private sector. America has some examples, some proto-examples like Brightline that are not high-speed rail. And moreover, Brightline, the original, is run by the private railway that was already running freight on the same line. This is important. You're not going to get a new entrant running high-speed rail. The Chuo Shinkansen, so that's the maglev between Tokyo and Nagoya that's being built and that's going to get extended to Osaka. That's run by JR Central, which, yes, it's a private company. It's the private company that runs the Tokaido Shinkansen and has done so ever since it came into existence by the privatization of Japan National Railways, which was the company that built the Shinkansen. So this is something that only happens through public sector action. The reason is that it requires a lot of coordination. High-speed rail requires an upfront investment of many billions. Startups don't do it. Startups are not going to risk several $1 billion in something that's, yeah, it's profitable, but it's not massively profitable, and the state can always extract profits. And medium-speed alternatives require so much coordination that it's even less likely that you can do it through any kind of privatization action. Switzerland, for example. Switzerland is a very privatized country in many ways, but not in railways. In railways, it's very top-down public sector coordination. They reject a lot of open access mandates that the EU tries to impose on the British model because Switzerland is not in the EU. They keep saying, no, the single SBB coordination works for us. And I mean, with that coordination, they have by a large margin, highest rail ridership in Europe. I mean, maybe some assholes are gonna, for ideological reason, try to pressure them on this, but nobody's gonna say the Swiss railways don't work. To the contrary, in Germany, for example, advocates have long looked up to Switzerland and tried to use it as a sanity check for internal German plans. Essentially, the idea is that maybe a German plan is good if uh, it is like if it is like what exists in Switzerland. And so, you need so the point is that you need intergovernmental coordination on this. It's not something that you can just do through a private sector action. And oh, hi. And so because you need to do it through coordinated. So what is the problem with open access? Zone competition will solve. Okay, so let's start with the fact that there's been open access in Italy for, I think, about a decade, and ridership there, yes, it rose pretty substantially and is still per capita substantially less, I think maybe half as high as in France and Germany. Spain is starting about half as high as that, and yeah, you can say it converged to Italian levels. Renfe, but the thing is, even before competition, you could exactly point out what Renfe's operational problems were. So yeah, you can double Renfe, you can double Ave ridership, and again, it's going to be per capita still half what France and Germany get without this competition. The problem with open access is that good operations do not do anything that open access lives on. Open access lives on breaking the market into individual trains, often with different classes. And I don't mean first and second class on the same train. I mean a cheap train and an expensive train. It's how SNCF does this. This is awful. The open access, essentially, the open access lives off of this because of price discrimination, and it makes things more profitable. And it's just that the competition lets them find ways to lower their operating costs, and so. It means that, for example, the frequencies are going to be micro-targeted, which is terrible because the actual way things work when they work well is you don't micro-target. You forget everything business analysts in the last generation or two have taught you, and what you do is you run on a regular timetable. Here's how it works in Switzerland. Okay, there's no micro-targeting, no open access. They have their national TACT timetable. It's hourly, stronger links, like maybe Zürich to Bern, things like that. Not everyone's saying Zürich and Bern, so Zürich, nobody in this country says Zürich, it's Zürich. In Switzerland they say Zürich, but then I guess Bern or something. I don't actually know what they do with final R's in Switzerland, but I think they pronounce them like here. So anyway, between these two cities, or between Zürich and Basel, yeah, it's every half hour, in fact. Start of day to end of day. Even the commuter trains have very little extra service at rush hour. I mean, they have to have some. Ridership does have peaks, but they try to handle it through longer trains rather than through higher frequency. I don't remember what it is now. Before the second tunnel opened in Zürich, I think it was 20 trains an hour off peak, 24 peak maybe. So very, very low peak to base ratio. And this is something that private operators never. Private operators are incredibly peaky. Often it's a behavior of private bus operators, because private bus operators, usually if they're new entrants, they go kind of like in the nooks and crannies between other things. So often you will find that they don't even have normal full-time employees, especially when they're ethnic. So it's a common. So these private buses, it's a common thing in parts of the New York suburbs. They mostly cater to let's say immigrants who don't speak very much English, like the Chinatown buses. They do it in Chinese, or you have buses that work in Spanish between very Hispanic suburbs and parts of Jersey, like Patterson and the city. And essentially because of that, they also get employees at a discount. And one of the things they do, instead of paying them less, they also pay them less, is they do things like they do split shifts, or things that if you have a regular workforce, the regular workforce will hate. and then you'll need to give them regular shifts or do things like you need to pay them in between. So it's again, it's things that you can do in the margins, but you can do on the margins. So it's something that if you have a system like in New York, nearly everything is public, and then I don't know what percentage of the ridership is private buses. I'm guessing 5%. Yeah, it's something you could do when you're 5%. You can't do it when you run everything. And so if it's 5%, it looks more efficient. But on the level of a system, what you need is regular frequency all day, no price discrimination. You can have first and second class on the same train. You can charge more for trains that are going to fill. That's not price discrimination. That's because in advance which trains are going to fill, because rush hour occurs every day, holiday peaks occur every year, weekend peaks occur every week. So it's essentially static pricing to avoid the situation where people feel cheated if they couldn't find the correct way to book the ticket in the most optimal way, which is something that business analysts don't really care about because it's difficult to measure, and so they can't explain it at the quarterly earnings call. Part of it. Oh, yeah. There's also you can also do it with a medallion system. So anyway, that's the problem with open access. It's so that's with the timetables, and finally, you need coordination with connecting trains, with regional trains, and so Switzerland lives off of that, and with that system, cities that are not big, not especially dense, generate per capita ridership. Again, this is by a margin the highest per capita ridership in passengers or passenger kilometers in Europe. Highest traffic density in Europe, I believe, passenger kilometers per track kilometer also, I think. I think it goes Japan, then China, then I'm forgetting where India is relative to Switzerland. I imagine South Korea and Taiwan are also higher. But this is more than anywhere else in Europe. And likewise in Germany, it's not as good as in Switzerland. It's not as good in Switzerland, but yeah, there's coordination with all these connecting trains. And then in France, there isn't. In France, there's sometimes cases where so this is something I actually learned from Jon Worth, who's this activist who has been pushing this. This is in his blog post, Fixing France's Railways. He gives an example of of poor coordination between the TGV and regional trains, to the point that sometimes the last regional train of the day departs before the last TGV of the train arrives at the intermediate point. So this is intergovernmental again, usually the state versus regions. Usually the way it works in Europe is there's devolution on matters of regional trains. And yeah, so France, but bear in mind, in France, they don't do that. Why do they have such high ridership? Well, it's still one SNCF. Thank you very much. So SNCF will have direct trains from basically everywhere in France to Paris. I mean, there's no coordination with regional trains, but trains that are way past the TGV network will have a TGV meandering at low speed, let's say from Les Sables d'Olonne to Nantes, and then I don't actually know where it would hit the line in Rennes or Le Mans or something, and then they would speed to Paris. This being a very small place, it's just has a lot of domestic tourism. It's beaches. And the same is true of so much of France. So for example, Paris to Lyon. It's not just about Paris to Lyon. I don't just mean it's not just about Paris to Lyon because at this point the high-speed line goes as far as Marseille. No, I mean the trains. So the regional trains from Lyon to Saint-Étienne being a matter of 500,000, separate from Lyon. Maybe the German way would be, these trains would also be slow. But assuming these trains were fast as in France, the German way would be high frequency here, and then these trains are coordinated with fast regional trains to Saint-Étienne. The French way is, I don't remember what frequency. Let's say hourly-ish. Again, it's never as regular, unfortunately. Trains go to Lyon, and then from Lyon they continue at lower speed once they try to Saint-Étienne. And same thing with Grenoble. And same thing with going to with going to going to Genève, to Chambéry. So a lot of these medium-sized cities do get connections with the TGV. It's not coordination at its best, but it is coordination. And if you're trying to be Flixtrain is never going to get this. Yeah, Flixtrain maybe could scramble something in a counterfactual in which France had open access, but it would not leverage the entire system. And this is something that you can do when you have public sector action. So this is why open access, yeah, it improves things relative to truly ghastly operations like those of Spain, but it's not going to get you to German or French, let alone Swiss ridership. Yeah, exactly. Planning is a state competence, and it's trying to do open access with schools, right? I mean, Sweden does that. You can look exactly what happened to their test scores in the 10 or 20 years after they implemented that system. They plummeted. You really need, it's something that there's no alternative to state on, and this means that cross-border rail is something that requires either EU action at the level of like that kind of crayon, or at least some kind of, I want to say some kind of intergovernmental action. And again, it can be regional or intercity. And the point is that the reason the TGV is good domestically is SNCF is state-run. If the service is poor or overpriced, people will complain. The government will tell them to stop. Across the border, they stop caring, and this is how the fares on Thalys and Eurostar, on Thalys and Eurostar, these fares are about twice as high per kilometers on domestic TGVs or ICEs. So yeah, no shit, the ridership is lower. No, there are lines, and again, sometimes it's regional lines, sometimes it's intercity lines, where the where it's almost as if there's nothing past the border. It's horrible. In Eastern Europe, for example, a lot of lines that used to be pretty important before the end of World War I, they've been cut, and then there's only service to the border town. Maybe not if it's the really high prestige things, or if it's sort of big cities. There are trains between Vienna and Budapest. I don't know if they go via I don't know if these trains go through Bratislava. There are many trains between Vienna and Bratislava. But the smaller lines, often they're cut at the border, often permanently. So this is something that Jon Worth mentioned to me just now, that the train between Freiburg and Colmar has this problem where it was literally cut at the border. The bridge was bombed in the war. So this was a line. So this is the line from Freiburg. It went over the bridge and then to Colmar. And the problem is the bridge was bombed in the war and rebuilt as a road bridge. So the connection no longer exists and would need to be rebuilt. And that's bridging the Rhine. That's not cheap. And it's a line that, it's interesting, but Freiburg and Colmar, yeah, they're medium-sized cities at best. That's not what you build. That's not what you bridge the Rhine for. You bridge the Rhine for much bigger things than this. So often what you need for cross-border rail is to find things where there's a lot of domestic use and not just international, I think. Yeah, I shouldn't say open access works if the state railway is really incompetent, because remember, the ridership you're getting out of Italy is half as much per capita as what we have and what France has. Spain, I imagine, will land roughly where Italy is. Like open access can improve things relative to a truly incompetent operating paradigm like that of Renfe. But what that can get you is still less, at least factor of 2 off what good public sector planning looks like. So it's not very unlikely, just impossible to happen privately, because it requires some kind of coordination between operations and construction. So again, you need something that has dual use. So these could be things that are regional. I don't know, Antwerpen to Eindhoven, various improvements between Germany and Poland. You can find things. They're slowly building Germany to Czechia. There's this plan for a base tunnel here, which I vlogged before. They shouldn't do it as a base tunnel. They should do it cresting over the mountain as a passenger-only line. That might actually happen just because it connects to a actually viable future Czech high-speed rail system if Czech can actually build that. Czech has very good operations and construction costs from hell. Going from Ostrava to Katowice, this is a regional line where improvements are likely just because they're pretty close. It's not actually that hard to connect to improve this or to improve this. But the issue is that the main prices are intercity. And when I say the main prices, what I mean is that public transportation can be divided into, let's call it 3 categories: urban, regional, intercity. Urban, I mean things like the U-Bahn the U-Bahn here, the S-Bahn here. If you're not a very small city, or the urban parts of public transportation, at least the rail parts, will make money if you want them to make money. So the U-Bahn in Berlin before Corona broke even, VBB in general, I think had a fare box operating ratio of 2/3. So for every euro in expenses, I think 66 or 67 cents came from fares, and the rest were subsidies. There's also a little bit in advertising. I don't remember which side of it is. But it's small, that advertising that. But that's all of Brandenburg. So yeah, sure. And the buses in Frankfurt an der Oder and Cottbus, yeah, they received subsidies. But my understanding is that the U-Bahn broke even, and I think also the S-Bahn within the city at least. Maybe the buses got subsidized. And I think this was also true in München, where I think also the München U-Bahn broke even before Corona. There's no separate fare receipt data in Paris by mode, but you can figure out the expenses. The Metro made money. Maybe still, I imagine still does, because they haven't done anything like the super discounts that we've had recently with like the €9, €29, €10, whatever ticket. So essentially, if you're if you're doing subsidies, it's out of a political decision to maybe offer very deeply discounted fares, which is true in a bunch of Italian cities where they're 30, 40 euro monthlies, or in Vienna with its 365 euro annual ticket, and now in Germany with a 49 euro Deutschland ticket, and with even further discounted things like the like the tickets within Berlin are, I think, they used to be 29. I think at this point it's 10 euros, maybe 9 euros. So so you can choose to deeply discount as a political strategy, but on the normal fare, it's not going to be a rich people only fare. If you do the pre-2022 fares there, which are 86 euros within the city a month, that's fine, and you can make money on that, or break even. You can't generally make long-term profits because you will just expand them. Not expand, but expand. You will essentially, if you have profits, you will just run more service. So that's the urban side. And again, I'm talking about European cities. I think that even the Helsinki metro was profitable before Corona. Maybe still is. So I'm not even talking about like giant Asian cities. Intercity makes money. In fact, in Europe, it's an EU rule. It's illegal to subsidize intercity rail, to the point that if you do want to subsidize intercity rail, you reclassify it as regional, essentially, or you do it as some kind of essential service. And these are things that are truly peripheral to the network. Like Poland is a very capital-centric intercity rail system. It's rather like France without the speed. So from time to time, they do these I don't know if deeply, but these subsidized lines that are kind of cross country and don't go through Warsaw, and usually suck. Like, one train a day or two trains a day, and they're not going to be fast. Italy, same thing. So I showed you the spine, right? So Torino, Milano, Firenze, Roma, Napoli. There are some intercity lines to some truly peripheral places in Italy. Things like Ancona, like Ancona, Rimini. To I don't actually know where it goes from there. That is an intercity line that's getting subsidies, also pretty irrelevant to the to the rest of the network. Or they just reclassify these lines as regional for subnational subsidies, like Berlin to Magdeburg, things like that. Magdeburg to Leipzig. These are, to be very clear, only 150 kilometers. Or 100 and a bit kilometers. It's not meaningfully an intercity line, but it's called this way so that they can tell, so the Deutsche Bahn can get rid of it because it's not making money. So they can tell Sachsen-Anhalt that Sachsen-Anhalt needs to subsidize this. But again, things are pretty peripheral. And then there's the regional network, which just cannot make money. So by intercity standards, Magdeburg is peripheral because we can just go over the list of all of the German cities that are bigger, right? I mean, Berlin, obviously, Hamburg, Bremen, Hannover. I think Bielefeld is bigger than Magdeburg. You can chop the Rhine Road into like probably 10 different places, each of which is bigger than and more important than Magdeburg. Frankfurt, Mainz, Saarbrücken, Karlsruhe, like so much stuff is more important. I mean, Magdeburg, yeah, okay. Magdeburg is essentially the city that was bypassed because when they chose what to modernize between Berlin and Hannover, they had two options: the older line that goes through Potsdam, Brandenburg, and Hannover, Magdeburg, and Braunschweig. Goes like this, or they could upgrade the Nor line, which I think is from the early 20th century, not 19th or something, or late 19th and not middle, which doesn't pass through any of these and just goes through Wolfsburg. And due to Cold War, essentially the line was planned at the end of the Cold War as a connection from West Berlin to the rest of West Germany. So they didn't try to connect to eastern cities. And then after the Cold War was over, they kept planning this instead of planning this. There were riots in, I think, Brandenburg and Hannover and Magdeburg, but they still built this. So this is kind of a weird spot where Magdeburg ended up bypassed by the more upgraded intercity rail network. It shouldn't have been, but it has been, and it's not important enough to go back and fix this, essentially. Yeah, it's pretty common for urban rail to be profitable, and then for intercity, and then I can't think of any regional line that is, except things that are basically big city urban commuter lines. In Japan, they keep getting rid of their regional lines. They essentially spin them off to something called third sector railway, which is a euphemism for a railway owned by a prefecture or by a group of prefectures to be for subsidized regional rail. The Shinkansen makes money. The Tokyo and Osaka commuter lines make money. I imagine Nagoya could. I don't know if it does. JR Central barely even knows that Nagoya commuter lines exist. Why would it care? It has the Tokaido Shinkansen. And then regional things in small cities. I don't mean Fukuoka. I mean Morioka. Don't make money. And so these lines are, again, they're always subsidized. Things like, I don't know, Magdeburg to Leipzig, connections between Berlin to Leipzig that are for the intermediate cities, or if you're on a Deutschland ticket, for the free ticket if you don't ride an intercity. So yeah, you connect in Dessau, not because I give a shit about Dessau, but because it's free. So things like connections to Dessau, Wittenberg, Cottbus, again, Frankfurt an der Oder, like these kind of things. Yeah, you can't make money off of that. And the thing is, rail revival does not really depend on these. Now, these can be useful feeders. Don't get me wrong. They are to an extent in Germany. And again, in France, it would be through service. But that's not really what makes high ridership tech. So yeah, you can try to improve these lines across borders. And again, it was the example that, again, it's all stuff that I heard from John, the regional examples, things like Freiburg to Colmar. Yeah, it's a cool line, but I mean, that's not what high ridership is made of. And the examples, I think, need to involve things that are truly intercity scale. And this is where, again, you can't do it through private action or through pilot programs. I gave this, I talked about government by pilot, I'm forgetting when, I think 2 weeks ago. And the problem with government by pilot is that it doesn't let you do anything that requires scale. It's often the domain, often reducing everything to a pilot program is the domain of the sort of business-oriented people who think like private businesses and not like the state, and then they get to run parts of the state and they run it poorly. And they give some examples from Boston in that video. And it's the same here. So it's all of this stuff that, yeah, it requires a couple billion euros, but I mean, the German government has a couple billion euros to spare. So does the French government. It's all money that's getting wasted. The whole point is to do things that also have domestic use. So within Germany, what this would, the lines that I think are useful for this, so probably the most important would be Frankfurt to Saarbrücken. So you would either go through, you would either do Mannheim to Saarbrücken if you are okay with a detour, just because you need to build a little bit less, because Frankfurt to Mannheim is already being building, or I shouldn't say upgraded, they're building a high-speed line between Frankfurt and Mannheim, because the existing line is not very fast and is also the second busiest intercity rail link in Europe behind Paris to Lyon. It's very busy, so they're figuring they might as well also make it high speed while relieving capacity issues. This is supposed to take half an hour. Not too often Frankfurt. I think they're planning on doing this in half an hour, or a bit less, and now it's about 40 minutes, I think. It's not the very high speed, it's just that it fits into all these half-hourly segments so that you can have timed connections into Deutschlandtakt. This is supposed to be a bit more than half an hour, but it can be done in a bit less. Germany has this problem of way too much timetable padding, and if you fix that, it's kind of annoying because Germany has all these city pairs that are, 90 or 100 kilometers apart, and it would be perfect at high-speed rail speed for half an hour, like Nuremberg to Filzburg. It requires you to have a high-speed rail network that is capable of running at low buffer time, 7, 10%, and not 25%, which is what Germany is doing right now. Filzburg to Frankfurt is again 100, or Filzburg to Fulda, it's 87 on the railway, probably 95. This is again probably going to be 95 with the squiggles of actual railways. This is going to be more difficult, but possible if you're okay with tunneling, which you should be. Or this, an no-fill to Bielefeld. I think it's 90 by straight line, and perhaps going to be 95 maybe, 97. So then Bielefeld to Dortmund. Anyway, Frankfurt to Saarbrücken. I think they should not do via Mannheim. I think they should do direct Frankfurt to Kaiserslautern. I guess this might be half an hour. And then Kaiserslautern to Saarbrücken. Can you do it in 15 minutes? Strained, maybe. Probably not. Probably more like 20, and then this is at the end, so it doesn't matter as much for connections, and then it's a couple more kilometers across the border. Saarbrücken to Paris is an hour 47. You bypass the last few slow kilometers through Forbach or whatever. Forbach is not actually important enough to be on the intercity line, I'm sorry. And then you can just do, it's just going to end up being Paris to Frankfurt in about 2.5 hours. And that's going to, so I mean, I can tell you how much ridership it's going to get. So here's the problem. I can't tell you how much ridership it's going to induce, because that gets into second order issues. So I'm telling you, so I told you about this formula at the beginning, where in this formula, again, I kept scrolling past old blog posts where I was showing pictures of fantasy barbarians, where the fantasy barbarian is where the fantasy barbarian just indicates it is an imperfect model. Now, it's a model that works okay at levels, but the problem is if you're trying to figure out differences, the difference between Paris to Frankfurt today and Paris to Frankfurt with higher speed, that gets hairy. I mean, right now it's about 4 hours, and again, it should be 230. Again, the model tells you how much extra ridership it's going to induce because of this factor of 2 in the denominator, and this is more than 500 kilometers. So this is going to be a factor of 2.56 increase in ridership. I mean, it can tell you how much ridership it should have. So Frankfurt is at a metro area of about 6 million. It's a very wide definition of Frankfurt. It includes Mainz, for example, but the trains probably would have a stop. Maybe not Mainz Hauptbahnhof, but something that is peripheral in Mainz and then has a quick connection to Hauptbahnhof. So I'm comfortable including that. And if not, then they would go through here and then and then there's Darmstadt. Darmstadt is also pretty close to Frankfurt and so on. So I'm comfortable calling Frankfurt 5 or 6 million, even with the understanding that the 6 million. Okay, 6 million might be overkill, but 5 would include Mainz, but not Fulda, for example. And it would include Darmstadt again, but it's fine. So 5 million times Ile-de-France is about 12 or 13. And the constant, the 75k is for assuming it's 500 kilometers, and the actual, I believe this is 347. I want to say that this is 347, but it looks too close to that to be true. Maybe 357, and then this looks like maybe 60 and a bit. This is not going to be direct 9. It's going to be more like 110. Maybe this is 170, 180. Yeah, we're talking about, I want to say about 550-ish. So remember 500 is that we max at 500, so it's still 7 million people. 7 million is very healthy. 7 million is a very healthy ridership on a high-speed line, especially because it's not actually going to be just this, because first of all, they're intermediate markets. They're not nothing. Things like Metz and Nancy, Saarbrücken, of course, Kaiserslautern, Rhin. Then there's the beyond Frankfurt, right? Because it includes Paris to Fulda. And Fulda is not big, but it's still something. Note also, it actually doesn't include Paris to a lot of other places in Germany, because it's always going to be faster to go direct to Köln than to go to Frankfurt and then Köln. I mean, I guess now Paris to Köln is about 4 hours because of Belgium slowdowns, but I imagine there should also be Köln to Aachen. That's also a high priority for a line that's, again, entirely in Germany, or almost entirely in Germany, and yet speeds up cross-border rail substantially. So Köln to Aachen, Frankfurt to Saarbrücken. And yeah, you can do this and then also talk to France about speeding up these few kilometers, but the slowdowns between Paris and Frankfurt, they're not mostly right across the border, they're on the German side. Yeah, there's short slowdown across the border, but it's much longer slowdown here. I shouldn't say here, it's here, it goes via Mannheim. Today. And so even with a few extra markets, so again, Fulda, eventually Berlin, because the way from Paris to Berlin, it's kind of the most direct is via Frankfurt. And maybe it's long, so there's a big discount on this. So there's going to be a big discount. But I mean, Berlin. I mean, if Germany had a functioning high-speed rail system, and it's slowly building one, slowly. So Berlin to Frankfurt is 4 hours. It should be about 2 at most. Like 1 to Erfurt from Berlin, then another Erfurt to Frankfurt. It's pretty aggressive, but it's doable. If it's 4.5 hours Paris to Berlin, then my model will say, I mean, bear in mind that my model is technically about distance, not time, but I'm making assumptions about average speed. So I'm essentially assuming an average speed that's standard Shinkansen, which is about 220 kilometers an hour. So it's So we'll just call it 440. So like 990. And then right, because we did what, 13 times 6 like this, and then 990. And then it's 2.5 million, which again, it's not amazing, but you add it to the 6 or 7 million here, and then full that. I mean, that's a bunch. It's good. They should do it. And again, this is something that mostly benefits cross-border traffic. But first of all, SNCF and Deutsche Bahn do manage to cooperate across the border, unlike SNCF and literally everyone else. The second thing is that there's also substantial intra-German benefit to connecting Saarbrücken to the rest of the country much faster. Again, I can't give you the estimate of what the model thinks the benefit is. I mean, I can give you it. It's just that I would not trust the model on a difference. I would trust the model on a level. But this has a lot of benefits by itself. Even if you pretend that all of France is like a black hole. So this is something I think is. I mean, evidently they're doing. They're investing in the line up the Rhine from Karlsruhe to Basel, essentially because most of it is not about connecting to Switzerland, but about connecting to Freiburg. So again, things that so a lot of this would start with things they have to be pretty big. This is not a little project, and but things that have a very clear domestic benefit, which is kind of frustrating because for international things, probably München, like figuring out how to do München to Wien would be very nice. And that also includes decisions like how do you go from München to Salzburg? Because this is something I actually show in my crayon. This is not pure crayon on my part. So I'm portraying München to Salzburg as kind of circuitous. I'm portraying München to, like look at what I'm portraying for München to Wien. It's not direct at all. Like direct would be to just ignore Salzburg and then go straight to Linz. Now, again, there is this line. It's pretty straight. It's just not very well invested in. It's just not very important to the domestic German network is the issue. If they wanted, they could. But, I mean, if they're actually doing massive investment, in this case, the more circuitous option looks better, I think. And the reason is that this is not pure crayon. So this line from Innsbruck to Trento, that's actually being built. That's another base tunnel. So there's the two Swiss base tunnels, which are, so this one is already open, although I'm portraying it on the crayon as including some additional tie-in. So this bit is already open. The Chenry base tunnel, I think, just opened too, and if I'm wrong, then it will open any moment now, including a few things that are included already, and the rest are in medium and long-term plans by Switzerland. Very little of this is me crayoning. Most of this is me drawing crayon that already exists in Switzerland. Then there's this tunnel, which is not very useful for passenger rail, except from Bern, I guess. But anyway, the EU is building two things that are entirely within the EU. I don't think it's because they're trying to bypass Switzerland, just extra passes are good. This is one. The other is this, Lyon to Torino. And again, this is not crayon. This is stuff that's being built across the border. So this is being built. I'm crayoning the Italian approach as being faster. I think that this might not be actually in the plan, but it should be. So the Transalpine side, from Innsbruck to the rest of Austria, I think this is already being built. So up to here maybe, and then this is crayon. But it's something that they're thinking about. I mean, connecting München to the space tunnel. I mean, that gets people cross-border trains from München to Italy. These would be day trains because most of this is built as maybe not 300 kilometers, but 250 kilometers an hour. So yeah, that gets you competitive trip times from München to a bunch of Italian cities where people go on vacation all the time from Germany. It's fine. It's not even some kind of wide-eyed what if cars were bad or what if planes were bad. This is something that, I mean, people do take these trains. Not as many as if the trains were better, but people do take these trains. So the point is that there would be a Y here in Rosenheim, which connects to München or Austria, or most of Austria, including Vienna or Italy, via the Panhandle. I don't know if they actually call it the Panhandle of Austria. I think Panhandle is used as an American term, not a European one, but Innsbruck anyway. So again, this is something that's a little harder just because there's just no real domestic use for this. Berlin to Dresden, I honestly don't see it as a high-speed line by itself. I mean, the connection to, I think it needs Praga to pencil out. Maybe not, though. I mean, I can see a world in which, by the way, the reason I'm drawing this is a little squiggly is I'm drawing it as a passenger rail line. A high-speed passenger rail line. These curves are pretty wide. They're maybe 250 kilometers an hour. Just, they crest, they don't tunnel as much. Maybe this would be useful, but, I mean, it's mostly useful for domestic things. It's just, there's so much underbuilding in German intercity rail. But again, but the point that I'm making is that it's a lot. It probably would be things that start with things of domestic use. So Köln to Aachen connects Aachen to the rest of the country faster. Frankfurt to Kaiserslautern and Saarbrücken does the same thing. So probably that's where you would do cross-border rail in Europe. You would do things that have a very strong domestic component to the point that they might even pass a purely domestic benefit cost analysis, and if they don't, it's pretty close to the point that they might get built, and then you can more easily turn them into cross-border rail. And remember, this is all intercity. Now, you can't do it at pilot scale. You can't do it as like maybe throw 100 million euros to make one not very important politician happy. This is billions. Frankfurt was, as I said, this is probably 180 kilometers or 190 even. The way that it would go. So we're talking 6 billion euros. I think at average level of tunneling it would be probably on the order of 5.5 or 6 billion euros. I don't know whether this is average amount of tunneling. I haven't done any of the engineering on this. This looks like tunneling, but this is pretty mountainous. This is very flat. Mainz might need a little bit of urban tunneling, which is annoying. I think you're okay through Saarbrücken itself, but I'm not sure. Now again, Germany has 6 billion euros. It's not 6 billion euros in 1 year. It's part of a plan that's over the next 10 or 15 years. Köln to Aachen, it's shorter and might be zero tunnel. It's, I guess, 70-ish kilometers. And so these are things that, so this would be a lot cheaper, like, I don't know, 2 or something. Like 2 billion or a bit, or 1.5 even. And the point is that it's money. It's never going to be a pilot program. It's never going to be private investment. But it is something that I can see the German government do by itself if there's pressure on it by people who want better intercity public transport and probably think in Europe-wide terms. In Europe-wide terms, people do move people do move within Europe. There's a lot of EU mobile population. This is a population that travels a lot by train. These are people who tend to vote green very often. And yeah, it's just it's just a question of a lot of it's a question of priorities. And again, Germany is underinvesting even domestically, but it's something where I can see improvement. But again, it would have to be the big ticket items because regional rail, it's nice, but there's a reason it gets subsidies, and the reason is it just doesn't get a lot of ridership. It's something that's very obvious with the Deutschland ticket because you have these small trains, 3-car, 4-car trains that go every hour, and normally that's fine. And then suddenly with the Deutschland ticket, there's standing room only, and it's not even comfortable standing room because suddenly they're getting ridership by people who would be taking intercity trains, except these trains are free, right? Because the whole point of the Deutschland ticket is that the 49 euro monthly is nationwide, so you get it, and then you so you get it, and it's then and then the ticket that you use within the city, maybe not within Berlin, because Berlin is its own even cheaper ticket, but within, let's say, Berlin and its immediate suburbs or something like that. And then when you get that, you have free travel on regional trains all over Germany. And yeah, that suddenly overloads these trains. But but for the most part, these are just not very high ridership trains. Even with a Deutschland ticket, I mean, yeah, there's standing room only ridership, but it's an hourly train that I think is only 4 cars. And just as a reminder to Americans, a single level car in Europe is 3/4 the size of an American car. So think of it as an American 3-car train. High-speed trains, by the way, bi-levels are usually US size, so 25 meters. High-speed cars are usually that size, maybe a bit less, maybe sometimes even a bit more. But your standard regional train here is like 18 or 19 meters if it's single level. And so and so cross-border rail, something, again, it's going to be, it's in general, rail planning starts from the top down. It's actually something that I learned from Marco Chitti, who I'm going to cite on this, because Marco is amazing. And I have one main criticism of him, which is, you see this is when he wrote his most recent post. He should write more. What he writes is very good. So one of the things he points out in planning region-wide integrated transit in this is that when you build an integrated timetable, you start from the top. So in Switzerland, it's a nationwide system, and it starts from the big intercities. The whole point of Switzerland, of how the system came to exist, is that in the 70s they started, and I think this was inspired directly by the German intercity brand that began in the 70s, I think 71. So Switzerland started timetabling the trains in city so that they would arrive just before the hour and depart just after, or even on the hour for simplicity, from many different destinations, so people could connect. And then they start asking, wait, why don't we do it in more cities? Wait, it's hard because the distance between the cities is a little more than an hour. Okay, so let's invest to make this a little bit less than an hour and then make this more stable. And that is how the Schweizer Takt became a thing with Bahn 2000, built in the 90s and very early 2000s. I think it's a system I think the system largely opened 2004. Elements of it, I think Zürich Basel opened in the 90s. So the point is that you start from the top, and in Switzerland it starts from intercity, and then regionals work into that. Marco has given an example in Italy where it's not a nationwide thing at all, it's a regional takt. And so with the regional takt, we start with the main regional line through your region. He's given an example, I think it's from Valdosta, maybe? I think it's from Aosta. Where is this? Pustel. Oh, no, that's not Valdosta, that's the other mountainous periphery of Switzerland that is Trento, that's around here. So you start with the main line, and then you figure out the knots, and then you figure out connecting lines, which will probably be by bus in this case. And so the point is that when you try to do a Europe-wide network, you probably need to start with the highest intensity lines, not with a pilot. Regional lines would be nice, but it would be things that should start with lines that you expect to be very heavily used. And again, I'm gonna plug Frankfurt to Saarbrücken again, Köln to Aachen, except that would require more work in Belgium, whereas Frankfurt to Saarbrücken requires very little work in France. It requires some, but very little. And once that happens, the thing is, I'm starting to believe that ridership would not really see that it's international. So what I mean is, as I said at the beginning, best time to drink water is mid-sentence. As I said at the beginning, Eurostar severely underperforms my model by a factor of 2.5. I cannot tell you whether whether domestic TGVs perform on or above model. There are some specific numbers that look like they overperform, but I'm not sure. It's based on it's based on things that I probably need to revise, and it's based on numbers that I saw 10 years ago, and I'm pretty sure I was missing a lot of subsidiary metro areas in the model, but not in the overall ridership. It was something like overall TGV ridership between Ile-de-France and Provence, and maybe I was trying to look at just what the model says about Marseille and Nice, but I also should be looking at Avignon separately, and I should be looking at Toulon, and I think Aix is part of the Marseille region. So it's things where I think I was just missing a bunch of stuff, and this is why it looks like an overperformance. Again, Germany, the one example, the one line where I know the ridership is Berlin to Hamburg, and the model slightly underpredicted, but only slightly. And so and by the way, European high-speed rail fares are lower than in Japan. So it's possible that the model, which is drainage and constant, should be adjusted a bit upward in Europe. And that means that Eurostar doesn't underperform by a factor of 2.5, by a factor of 3. And again, that's fine, because I can explain most of the underperformance just with a security theater. I think the security theater and the lines by themselves, if you adjust for that, the prediction goes from 25 to maybe 15 million. And again, the actual is 10. And then suddenly you need to explain a factor of 1.5, maybe a bit more if we're expecting overperformance out of domestic. And then, yeah, ticket fares can explain a factor of 1.5. Yeah, that's fine. These are more expensive tickets than Shinkansen. Shinkansen is expensive, but conversely, they are flat. No bullshit about how they depend on time of day, or they depend on whether you bought far in advance, so you never feel cheated. And in particular, the combo of tickets always costing the same and high frequency is that the behavior in Japan is you don't even pre-plan. You just show up at the train station, you show up at Tokyo or Shin, Osaka, and you ride the next Nozomi. And yeah, maybe you need to wait 20 minutes for the next Nozomi, but you buy the ticket right there, so it's much more spontaneous. So you actually get something back from the more expensive Japanese system, which is I think in Japan it's like 20 or 23 cents per kilometer, and I think Eurostar is 23 euro cents a kilometer, so much more. And then domestic TGVs and ICEs are I think 10 or 11 euro cents per kilometer, but again, not perfectly spontaneous, especially not on the TGV. So so all of it just works out, I think, and then that means that things that would have the ones open the link would have pretty high frequency. So as I said, this is going to be probably about 7, and then with Berlin and everything else, I'm guessing we're talking 14-ish million. Like Paris to Berlin, Paris to Leipzig, Halle, not Hamburg, which would be faster Vecon, Fulda, things like, again, intermediate things with involving Saarbrücken, or Saarbrücken and Metz, and Nancy. Like, Metz and Nancy are not nothing. I think they're like 500,000 each, and then I guess Saarbrücken, I'm guessing, is about the same. Harder to say. German metro areas are defined in a kind of funky way. So again, that's not nothing. If it's 500,000, let me check that again. I actually pre-computed a few things before I started vlogging, and so I did look at all of the urbain. So Nancy is 430, and Metz, I actually looked at the table in French because it's more complete, and Metz is basically the same, maybe a bit less. right, because Nancy is here, 4:35. And where's Metz? Yeah. As I said, very close. So these, what is Ile-de-France? 12 and a half. Not 13, 12 and a half. Okay, yeah. That's not nothing, but I mean it's not a lot, but it's not nothing. And this is no. This is just Nancy, and then Metz would be about the same. And again, the model doesn't know what distance is up to 500, and this is well within 500. Again, technically we're talking 2 hours 20, so Bordeaux is 2 hours, and so the model does not know the difference between Bordeaux and Lille. Again, I'm being very clear about limitations of my model, but essentially it, and of course it's a straight line, so Frankfurt is by rail would be a bit longer. So anyway, the point is that that's not something that you're getting out of the line because it's domestic already, but you can get these connections to Frankfurt, right? So 0.5 to 4, I guess. Frankfurt, we said, is 5 million people. So yeah, that's another million. Which again, it's not amazing, but it's not nothing. And then maybe the 500,000 or however many are in the area around Kaiserslautern, around Saarbrücken, plus a couple extra. I think Kaiserslautern is 100,000 people. I won't say that there might be some extra ridership because of the American military base, but at least when I was in Kaiserslautern with Americans who are involved in the military community, they were driving. So, I mean, a friend of mine. I met a friend of mine and we drove to Mainz. So the point is that, yeah, it's 1 million here, 1 million there, but that adds up. So I'm guessing again, Paris-Frankfurt would be like 14 million this link a year. So this is a calculation that I keep doing from scratch every time because the assumptions, I never remember my assumptions because my assumptions depend on which country I'm talking about. Because in the United States is tabula rasa. The United States has one intercity line that's worth even remembering it exists, which is the Northeast Corridor, and even that line, so much of the planning is tabula rasa, so I can just say what the train should look like, and here I need to actually talk about existing trains. So a train has about 900 seats here because Europe loves its cafe cars. There are 2 trains in each direction. There are, how many useful hours are there in a day? 16 maybe? Because you don't want to do, because you want to, let's say 5-hour window in which no trains run on the line, but it's not like trains are going to magically appear at, let's say, 5:30 in the morning and then magically disappear at 12:30, right? They need to get to the last station. You can maybe even fudge it and say that maybe in the vicinity of Paris, it's understood that the trains arrive maybe a bit later, maybe they also depart a little bit later or something. If there's an inbound outbound dichotomy, you can play with that a little bit. But at the end of the day, if you have maybe 19 hours that you can run, and then the trains take 2 hours, and then you can say, then it's 17 useful hours, right? Or even if it's 2 hours, you might say 16 useful hours. Let's say 16 useful hours. And then, so this is seats per day. If you run hourly in each direction for 16 hours, this is how many seats you're getting a year from your hourly train. Now, France loves doing micro-targeting to fill its trains, but the ridership is going to get capped by the frequency problem. Germany is slowly getting past French ridership. 15 years ago, more people rode intercity trains in France than in Germany. Is no longer the case. Now, the German economy has been better since, but for example, French population growth is faster because people in France have children and people in Germany don't. Now again, it's now Germany since then has had actually high immigration. So your population here is increasing. Essentially, whenever there's an immigration wave here, like 2015 or 2022, there's an uptick, and then it's but France's actual population growth in these other years as well, and so and here we just are doing better. But the one way we're doing better in Germany is through being okay with lower seat occupancy. Which might look inefficient, but remember, SNCF stopped making money 10 years ago because of surplus extraction by the unions and because of the WeGo and we breaking of the brand, which essentially reduces frequency on H. Essentially what happened was they lowered the fares and didn't get any extra ridership out of it. All the increase in TGV ridership in the last 15 years has been directly attributed to opening the lines to Bordeaux and to Rennes. And other than that, ridership has been flat. And I guess to Strasbourg as well. And in Germany, it's increasing with general growth. So I will say that we're doing better. And in Deutsche Bahn, Fernverkehr is profitable, I should say. The last departure might not go the whole route if it's very long. If we're talking about, let's say a forward train, like Berlin to München, I can see a world in which I actually don't know how it is right now. And also bear in mind that Berlin to München should be 2.5 hours, maybe a bit less than 3, certainly less than 3. And if you're ambitious, 2.5 hours. So that might go the whole route. But if it's something very long, where it might be 4 or 5 hours, then yeah, you're right. The last train, let's call this New York to Chicago. This should be a 5.5 hour line. The later departures aren't going to go all the way to Chicago, so maybe you're going to have some trains divert to Detroit, which otherwise would be a transfer. That's maybe 4 hours, not 5.5. Then you have trains, then maybe a train that ends in Cleveland, then the next one ends in Pittsburgh, and then, you can do that, but so that means instead of doing 19 minus 5, you still do 19 minus 2, 19 minus 3. But yeah, you're right. Fundamentally, it's something that probably should have mentioned on screen instead of having to wait for you to explain. So so to any rate, at German occupancy, this is what you should expect on average. Now, on the busier lines, you can go higher than this. It's okay to have busier and less busy lines, but you should expect this to be the ridership that gets you a train an hour, which means that Paris to Frankfurt would probably be 2. 2 of these, maybe possibly 3, if ridership is higher than I'm thinking it is, but probably 2 an hour, 2 trains an hour. Again, if there's more stuff to connect, you might think of a third frequency, even possibly 4, but let's talk about 2. So it's a train every half hour. It's going to be on a takt. It does require changes in the operating paradigm of SNCF, which is annoying, but the main annoyance is not that it's a 6 billion that it takes to build. It will generate value to pay for 6 billion. 2 trains an hour will generally do that for you. Especially because most of the line has already been built. The French side has already been built. Hell, their train's doing it today, so they take 4 hours instead of the more reasonable 2.5. And if they take 4 hours, then that also gets to issues of maybe over this distance people might drive, because the benefit over driving is not that great, right? It's 500 something kilometers. So the top speed on French highways is 130. In Germany, there's no speed limit, famously, but in practice, you're getting 130. You're driving 130 because there's traffic. So maybe driving this is going to be 5-ish, 6-ish hours. The train's probably still faster because so much of this is fast, but it's an actual choice to drive. If you're doing, maybe not if you're doing city center to city center, because lol parking, and also if you live in Paris, it's likely you don't own a car. And maybe if you're rich enough to go to Frankfurt a lot, then you're likely to own a car. But maybe if your travel is to city center, you're maybe a white collar professional, and relative to income, this is a group that's less likely to own a car. And maybe whereas let's say the handyman, the better off handyman, small business owners, things like that, they are likely to own a car. They also are less likely to be traveling intercity or internationally this way. So on net, probably if it's city center, I'm imagining plurality mode of travel. Paris to Frankfurt is still train, but there's a lot of stuff that would be induced by faster trips. And I'm guessing anything that's suburb to suburb people drive, they might even fly. I'm not sure. Certainly something like Paris to Berlin, people fly today. Yeah, that's for a train departing at 11 p.m. Yeah, that's like the train that departs 11 might. No, and maybe even the train that departs at 10 would do that. But yeah, beforehand you're just going straight. So you probably have something like 16 useful hours at the end of the day. So it's about this again with 50% occupancy. You're getting 2 trains an hour, which is good. It's a half-hourly clock face timetable. That goes probably Paris all the way to Berlin, and then it's a long line, so the later trains would just stop at Frankfurt and it's fine. Or maybe it would just be Paris to Frankfurt and people would transfer, but I'm guessing at least 1 train an hour would go all the way to Berlin, because there would also be ample ridership between Berlin and Frankfurt, right? Because that's all of Berlin, Frankfurt, Berlin, Saarbrücken, Leipzig, Frankfurt, Halle, Frankfurt, and of course paired with people going to Berlin, Halle, things like that. Erfurt, same thing. Fulda, same thing. So that's pretty heavy ridership. So yeah, that would be at least half an hour if the trains were fast, which today they're not. So that discourages ridership. Again, we can apply the same model. So Berlin is again 6 million. Frankfurt, as we said, 5. So this is 2 hours, and we're assuming 225 is where so essentially all of the sub things we're just ignoring the distance. So yeah, it's 4.5 million. That almost fills an hourly train. Leipzig, with the connection, it might be a direct train to Leipzig, or it might be connecting Halle. Halle is 500,000. Leipzig is 1 million if Halle is separate. So what else? Dresden would go to Leipzig and then divert on the line. I guess it's different frequencies though, so maybe we shouldn't count that. Erfurt is like 200 or 300,000 people, but that's still something. Fulda is what, 500,000? And then we do the connection to Berlin. But then we pretty symmetric to Frankfurt because the populations are very close. Again, it's not huge, but yeah, here I just justified to you at least an hourly train. And then you go to Saarbrücken, which is again, let's say 500,000. Now again, this may be, here you need to start discounting because this is, we're saying 2 hours and this is maybe 245-ish. So, and we're saying, and what we're defining as 500 kilometers is 215. So this is times this. And very soon we're just going to end up with, and of course, remember, we are talking about connections with Paris, so we do include Paris at the end. So 6 times 12.5. I think I did 13 before, but Wikipedia tells me that the attitude ban is that, so let's do that. And then this is massive because it's, again, it's 215 is what we take as the kind of reference case for distance, and this is 430, we're assuming, so divide by 2 squared. But that still gets us to more than 10 million in traffic density on this section, just on trains to Berlin. That's the point of it. I'm not even really. Again, it would be Leipzig, but I'm definitely not counting trains that are going to divert. So trains that might be Frankfurt to Dresden, and probably not direct, but with a transfer in Leipzig or something. Or Magdeburg. I mean, still exists. So you would transfer in Halle or something, or Berlin. So yeah, you include these things, and yeah, that's a train every half hour. So, this is yeah, exactly. Night trains. Yeah, I'm not even talking about night trains because usually with high-speed trains you want to avoid them because you want to be able to do regular nighttime maintenance without saying, oh, for the next few months, this line is going to be delayed by 40 minutes when we need to do long-term shutdowns, which is absolutely happening to Berlin-Hamburg right now. Or Frankfurt-Mannheim has the same issue with the lead one. So you really want to be able to set things up so that the maintenance is only ever done at night. There has never been a long-term shutdown of the Tokaido Shinkansen. And yeah, JR Central would prefer to have one, which is one of the benefits they're projecting out of the true Shinkansen. Is going to be easier to maintain. But they've been maintaining it this way for 60 almost years, right? It opened 59 years ago. And so, yeah, they don't... I mean, evidently it works that way. If you need to. So, yeah, we're talking like a train every half hour, and this is not going to be talking about the Crayon for a Eurail, probably like some kind of EU state-owned thing that's gonna, with like like the usual things where you have discounts for seniors and then discounts to soldiers of the EU army or something. And having EPP and S&D and Renew actually use language that is understandable by a human who does not live in Brussels, which they currently don't because there's no mass politics at the EU level. Except, do you think democratic Europe is a good thing? Yes, no. And then if you say yes, you vote. Let's face it, EPP is yes. I need to admit that's not just S&D and GAFA. Renew, same thing. And then if you say no, I think capitalism sucks, and you vote GNGL, and if you say no for any other reason, you vote ID. And it's essentially mass politics at the EU level. Like, do you like the regime? Yes, no. And then, but anyway, like, I mean, so I'm not talking about like crayoning that. I'm talking about like one specific line which I'm crayoning as. I won't say I'm crayoning it as this, but to be very clear, this exists. This is under, this exists. These are being planned. The only bits that are my crayon are doing this. This is currently a medium speed line where I'm essentially proposing doing this in an hour, where today I want to say an hour 40. Essentially, this is a medium speed railway that is pretty fast. It's also incredibly easy terrain, so it's not going to be 30 million euros a kilometer. It's going to be more like 20. So just do it. And then this is the part that I'm actually crayoning in this video, in the context of this video. So we're essentially just talking about what would happen from this. And again, secondarily, if all of these were fixed. So this is Germany's responsibility, and things through Liège and Leuven, also for fuck's sake, Brussels to Antwerp, is Belgium's. So if you were advocating for stuff in Belgium, I would talk about completing the domestic intercity, the domestic high-speed intercity rail network, so that, for example, you would have fast trips from Brussels to Antwerp, which would also free up capacity on the classical lines, I think, what they're planning on this. And then also do a bypass of Leuven, which would probably enable... So this looks like, so bear in mind, all of this is, I'm crayoning on a line, so the part that is me crayoning is just, like, anything from this east exists, within Belgium at least, so it's just me crayoning this little section. Maybe speeding up through, travel through Brussels. The line is not that bad, it's just slow. It's things like that, which also have certain regional benefits. In the same way that when I advocate to Americans what they should be doing for the intercity rail network. I talk about how they can speed up the literal last mile into Grand Central, which it's 1 mile, right? Expect it fast, right? No, it takes 6 minutes. It's 10 miles an hour. Like, they could do it it's a terminal, so it's bumper tracks, so it cannot be done that fast, but could be very easily sped up from 6 minutes to 3. So 3 minutes speed up over a 1 mile section with rebuilding and interlocking, which Americans think would cost trillions and probably guessing is doable for $20 million maybe. Switch is 250,000 or thereabouts. And because I'm only remembering it to a first order, it could be dollars or euros. And you need 4 tracks, and each of them splits to a few. There are many tracks. Grand Central, don't need all of them. Yeah, we're talking probably 20, 30-ish switches with a couple things, because maybe double interlocking. So you double that. Yeah, that's 10-ish million actually. More like, yeah. 3 million. If there's, I guess 10 million, then there's going to be a premium for underground, but it's not a factor of a million premium. Maybe 2 or 3. So yeah, 20, 30 million. Yeah, that speeds up all trains into Grand Central. I guess that's not interstate, it's mostly commuter and regional. That's by, 3 minutes. Maybe 4. 4 is kind of ambitious, but 3. Yeah. It's kind of the same with Brussels. Like, a lot of it is like that kind of last mile shit. Again, the slowdowns are here around Leuven, and then Liège is a very slow approach. So you do a bit of speed up, and essentially you do the kind of what I think of are the 2 most important things as far as infrastructure goes. Without infrastructure, just improving the operations here, which really means clamping down on Thalys overprice, on Thalys surplus extraction, which does require the EU to be more aggressive toward SNCF, which is possible, but the Eurocrats aren't comfortable with that. I'm not going to say it's politically difficult, because the EU has managed to successfully spank SNCF when it was trying to charge for train access by the car, because it uses bi-levels, and it says single level, and the court says, no, that's discriminatory. You're obviously doing it for that reason. You charge by I think it's by the seat. And if you're wondering if by the car makes more sense for a capacity constraint line, yeah, it does. Oh, well, by the train, but the LGV Est is not capacity constrained. The seat Est, yeah, the Est, lol. So yeah, you do. So again, it's something you probably should start with this and with this. This is harder because this is harder financially because essentially it's Thalys territory, and this requires kindly telling SNCF to stuff it. This is something where SNCF actually already charges normal fares, so that's a freebie. It's just building about $6 billion euros worth of high-speed line. Here it's less construction. Not nothing, but less construction, but also dealing with Thalys surplus extraction, at least from Brussels West. Brussels East, it's out, so it's fine. I guess this is maybe the next, I'm not sure, but it's usually something you would start with this on this. It's I think the main priorities. Again, I'm crowning a lot of things here. Most of the international thing is crowning. This is in the plan. Again, this is, I mentioned before, is already built. This is already planned. I think maybe this. This is planned. I'm doing a slightly different alignment, but this is already planned. Essentially, it's just this. And the connections. I don't think anything in Spain is crayon. I think everything within Spain is either in existence or being planned. And the only things that are not either already under construction or about to be, I think it's just this, and these are all both long-term plans. Like medium to long-term plans. So this is not very crayon. Spain builds a lot. So anyway, but again, the stuff that is me crowning, but explaining why this is actually good planning as opposed to just Eurail. And let's also ask questions like, how should the EU Navy name its 6 aircraft carriers? Or how should the armored divisions with main ground combat system be allocated? It's something that's like much more on the way there, this line, than actually talking about what I just talked about. This line and this line. Again, it's a start, but it's a start, but it's like starting the TGV from Paris Lyon as opposed to, or the Shinkansen from Tokyo Shin Osaka as opposed to doing a pilot. So it's something where you start small, but because you start, but small, okay, 6 billion euros. But you start with something that connects sufficiently sizable cities that it's going to be noticeable. There's going to be a bunch of ridership here. It can build itself out of this. If you build this, then in theory you can even do this. If for some reason this sucks too much, again, by itself you would not do it, but because this would be faster. But it does kind of drive doing this also. I will say, by the way, if all of this is built, this is critically crowded. Like, I think we're talking 130 million passengers on this leg. And remember, 10.5 million are the full seated capacity on one train an hour in each direction. The TGV manages to fill about 70% of the seats, so let's say 7.5 or 8 million. So this is something that would actually fill 16 trains an hour if everything is built, to the point that you need to start thinking about relief lines if a lot of stuff is built. But again, talking about 16 trains an hour here, again, this is out of a pan-European network. Something like, I want to say something like a quarter or a third of that traffic is just from the Netherlands. So this is something that very much lives off of international. It's not. Yeah, a lot of it is that a lot of people live in the Rhine-Ruhr, and the way the formula works is that with the exponent of 0.8 is that if you have a stop in every important every important secondary city, you get much more ridership out of this. So the model thinks that the Rhine-Ruhr will generate more ridership than Paris or London, because the ridership in the Rhine-Ruhr, the population in the Rhine-Ruhr is a little bit less. I think this is 11 million, 12.5, 14. But a single point of 12.5, a single point of 14, and this is 7 different points because separate stops for Dortmund, Essen, Bochum, Duisburg, Wuppertal, Düsseldorf, Köln. Bonn is being bypassed. If it weren't, it would also get a stop. And these are pretty sizable centers by themselves. Maybe not Bochum, but the rest. And so the and so this is supposed to generate more ridership. And that makes sense. I mean, it means that like trains from Berlin or Hanover, you don't have a long station access time, or I guess egress time, the way you would out of Paris, where if your onward destination is not close to from here Gare du Nord, from here Gare de l'Est, then yeah, you have a nice schlep across the metro with your luggage. The metro is infamously inaccessible. Maybe the RER, if you can swing it, but not everything is on the RER. And then here, your destination is likely to be walking distance to, or very close to at least, one of those Hauptbahnhöfe. The relief, would it make sense? Maybe. I haven't actually run the model on this entire system, only on sections of it. So essentially on the main Northern European section. So essentially, I put it in a spreadsheet. I also think the spreadsheet lies a little bit. I need to fix some things there. But for example, the spreadsheet only includes Paris to points north and east, but not southeast or southwest. So from the purpose of the model, Europe consists of Northern Europe, but only as far south as Zurich and Basel. I don't think Bern exists to the model. Through the spreadsheet at least. I think nothing from here south exists, so nothing in Italy, nothing south of Paris. Okay. So I do need to run it and see what it says about Paris to Lyon if trips through Paris get fixed. They currently kind of suck. Bear in mind the reason that I'm crowning the kind of remains of this, and instead of just saying, well, the plans say go like this, is that specifically the point is to do Paris to Madrid without overloading the main line. So the whole point of again, this is not crowned because this opened a couple years ago. This is, I think, I don't think this is under physical construction, but it's in design and engineering, and the same is true of this under a slightly more circuitous alignment. This is crayon. This is about to open. I think this is already open. This is open. This is being planned to Pamplona. This is, I think, long-term plan. And the reason I'm actually pasting all of this together is that it's really important to me to like figure out ways to do the fastest ways from Paris to Barcelona and to Madrid that go via Bordeaux and not via Lyon, just because this is much less busy than this. So there is a little bit of relief in this crayon. It is Madrid, yeah. It is faster, but I think the issue is that, I think this is also always going to be faster even by this. This is partly also about making it, like doing a little bit of construction to make this much faster. But this, I think, if you build this and this, just because the LGV Est, not Sud-Ouest, Sud-Europe Atlantique is so much faster than the old line. This is, I think, faster than this, which is good for Paris-Barcelona. Because again, you want to yeet as much stuff away from this as possible. And so the current Frankfurt relief line, I'm not sure it would be a current to Frankfurt relief line. That's the point. Like the point is to relieve. So again, if we're talking again, and to be very clear, when we're talking about like relief to Frankfurt Köln, it's a sort of system when we're talking about how the 8th Armored Division of the EU Army is being rotated out of like its post in Vitebsk, and the Vitebsk, this city. Like Belarusian and Russian are rather similar, and Belarus has not undergone the Ukrainianization, the equivalent of the Ukrainianization that Ukraine is undergoing. So they have Russian and Belarusian names coexist. But anyway, so the point is that, as I said, quite a lot of the traffic density here is like on the north side, originating locally in the Rhine-Ruhr, but quite a lot of it is not. It's from Brussels or even London, or it's from the Netherlands. So with the Netherlands, for example, this is a relief line to some extent, because this keeps stuff like, I think it keeps all of Holland to, not Frankfurt obviously, to Frankfurt would go like this, but to maybe to parts like this might be faster. I think this might actually be faster to Fulda. Not sure. So it's a lot of it is on the margin. A lot of it is about the secondary markets, to the point that the actual relief might actually go something weird like Brussels through Luxembourg through something to Frankfurt might actually be viable as a relief line. But again, I'm not. Why is the old lane so much slower? Because it was built in the 1970s and early 80s, and max is at 300 kilometers an hour, and they needed to squeeze some speed out of it to even get it there. I think there are parts of it that are 270 and on 300, whereas this is, I believe, 320. Like the average speed Paris to Bordeaux, I believe Paris to Bordeaux is the single highest average speed between two major European cities, neither of which is in Spain. I believe that the fastest in Europe is still Madrid to Barcelona, but Paris to Bordeaux might actually even be faster. I'm not sure. Like this is an average speed of like 250 something or 260. This might even be number one in the developed world. This might actually. I think this beats every Shinkansen. Tokyo to important city, or Osaka or Osaka to important city. So I mean, maybe it's like something like, maybe there's something faster on the Shinkansen where it's, I don't know, I don't even know, Shinomori to Morioka or something. But again, I'm doing major city to major city, as opposed to, I don't know, Gare du Betrave here. So no, this is a really fast line. And I think this is, neither of these, obviously the most direct from Paris to the border would be like this, and it passes through Vichy and nothing else. And even Vichy is, let's face it, nothing. The Clermont-Ferrand or whatever. But I don't think this alignment is longer measured in kilometers than this alignment. So just to put it in perspective, this is 2 hours, as is this. And then this is 3 of I think Nîmes is also 3. Whereas if you build high speed, then 3 hours get you to Toulouse. And then 3 hours here versus 3 hours here, and then this is going to be somewhat faster. Via Toulouse rather than via Montpellier. I mean, we know we can check this, right? I mean, and now we're going to deal with my favorite jank, which is trying to figure out trips in France with their horrifically jank UI. Whereas Bando D is very easy. Today, no, not outbound today, because today you're gonna, let's do in a week. No, not outbound this. No, outbound isn't. No return, and let's do late morning, because I don't feel like waking up at 6 in the morning like I vote Les Républicains. I guess the only people who vote for Les Républicains are like retired. But I mean, it's also like people who I stereotype as waking up early. Direct, okay, fully booked, but I don't care. I'm looking at the time. This is 3:16 to Montpellier. 3:36 we go. 3:14 Ennui, and all of the Ennuis are fully booked. What exactly does it say about France as a country that the expensive trains fill faster than the cheap trains? Not sure, but none of the things that it might be saying are positive about that country. $3.14, and it's... Oh, and here they book the cheap trains first, at least. Okay, my faith in humanity has been restored. 3:35. Yeah, 3:14. And I think C de France, the British, is that because I can't show it to this. The point is that Montpellier is pretty unique in France. Is that the TGVs, the faster TGVs don't go through city center; they go through a bypass. C de France. I believe they go through this bypass in order to be able to reach, to keep going faster toward the actual destination, which is Perpignan, and from there, Barcelona. And so I think that these trains go, I guess, here rather than to city center. And even then, it's like 3:15, and you can do to Toulouse in 3. If you continue from Bordeaux, if you keep building the line from Bordeaux, which they are. I mean, France is building as because to Bordeaux it's 2 hours, and this is 2:12 straight line. In practice, it's going to be 2:20, 2:30. Yeah, no, it's going to be 3 hours, but maybe like 2:55 even. And then, yeah, I guess this is 136, and this is only 86. So I guess the line for Lyon is shorter, measured in kilometers by 50 something. But that's, I mean, 50 something kilometers at TGV speed. It's what at full TGV speed and at the higher speed because the station I mean, it doesn't introduce more slowdown. It's just one station. That's 50 divided by 300. It's 10 minutes, and you're already gaining about 20 going to Toulouse as opposed to Montpellier. Yeah, this is going to be narrowly faster, but it is going to be faster. And of course, you should run all the through trains through the faster route and not try to get people to use the slower and also more congested route. Come on. Why is second to first price? Yeah, the website is worse than your number. Yeah, no, the like UI is their passion. Why is the second to first price difference so tiny? I mean, because the main difference is not class on the train. They're not trying to do price differentiation through this. I think the seat pitch you get in first is a bit wider. I don't even know if it's 3 abreast and not 4 abreast in first. As you might imagine, I have never seen the inside of a first class car in France because why the fuck would I? I believe it's mostly like I believe you gain a little bit of comfort and then it's for a little bit extra money. Like the way they're trying to screw you for the money is through time of day pricing, through dynamic pricing, things like that. Whereas airlines do that and also charge you $7 billion for premium economy and $7 trillion for business. Anyway, are there questions? Because it has been 2 hours, and I mean I am running out of steam. I'm just talking about the initial lines, the ones that have you talk about having the EU play more role in standardizing procurement of ongoing military things, as opposed to talking about full EU army, as opposed to talking about how the divisions would that are stationed in eastern Ukraine and eastern Belarus would rotate defending the EU. I guess EU 27. Let's say Britain doesn't come back. 28, 29. Fuck Serbia. Yeah, EU 20 defending the EU 29 / NATO from Russian aggression. It's like almost to the point of like talking about Kralovic. How can you join the Discord? When I get off, I am going to send you a message. So can I DM you? Add guest, mod, timeout. No, I'm gonna ban you. I have no reason to ban you. I will figure out how to send you a message when we get off, and then I will. Oh, right, whisper. I will whisper at you with the with what's it called? With the Discord invite. I'm just paranoid about spam. You can share it with friends, that's fine, just don't share it in the open, like on an open Twitter or Fuddy or whatever account. But yeah, when I stop streaming, I'll do it, just because again I'm paranoid about spammers, and this is on YouTube, so I mean not as I speak, but if you're seeing it on YouTube, by definition it's on YouTube. Are there other questions? Yeah, there are these little plus programs. Yeah, SNCF exactly. The SNCF is not bad. Like it's airline brain at this point. So in the same way that we can talk about how the EU army is in part about efficiency, about how through things like scale and coordination, the armies that we have, which to be very clear are getting comparable amounts of total funding to the US Army, can actually be effective. People talk about funding in the US, in like the German Army. The German Land Army is probably getting the same funding relative to GDP as the US Army. The difference in military spending between Germany and the US is, I believe, entirely Navy and Air Force. In the sense that Germany doesn't have a Navy and doesn't have much of an Air Force. And it's the same thing. So it's the same thing with like EU stuff kind of coordinating things so that management can actually not be airline brain, if that makes sense, without going through full privatization, which in France it would be the same elite because France is a generalist elite, and these people are airline brain because they fly. Are there other questions at any rate? And if not, we can adjourn. Okay, I guess people don't have questions anymore. We don't have enough flag that I should be waiting several minutes for people to type. It's been enough time. So thank you all for tuning in today. And whether you're on Twitch or on YouTube, and I will see you once again in the next one. I imagine Saturday, 4 days with topic DVD. So thank you, and ciao ciao.